I have one thing to ask you guys, right? I'll show you something cool that you can use right away. So don't leave until I finish, right? Because you'll be like going back to your desks and like starting testing. And I want to thank you, Jeff, for inviting me. And I want to, on a personal note, I want to thank Wayfair for stopping advertisement on a hateful show. But painless testing. Okay, so I used to be C++ and C# and C developer, and I would do image processing, kind of like what Wayfair is doing right now for furniture, right? But now I kind of switched to JavaScript and front end, and especially Node.js development. You can find like my projects on GitHub and personal websites, and you will see the slides for this presentation at slides.com/Bahmutov later. But I worked at small companies and large companies, but now I'm at a company called Cypress, like a tree, and we do claim fast and easy and reliable testing for anything that runs in a browser. That means any web application, static sites. We're not tied to a specific framework. We do use React for our dashboard and our tools ourselves. I'm a very lightweight React developer, so I use other frameworks more, so don't judge me. But I know Kenzie does personally, so I have some street creds. We are a very small company, right? So everything that you'll see is a creation of an 8-person company. Most of what you'll see is a creation of a founder of a company, right? Who was a Rails developer. He needed a tool to test websites, and he looked at Selenium and Phantom.js, and he's like, no, that's awful. So he decided to write a thing, and 4 years later, right, magic, it comes out. So everything is harder than it seems. Right now we're 8 people. We are remote. Most people, or some people, are in Atlanta. I'm in Boston. We now have people on the West Coast as well. Okay, so testing pyramid, right? First of all, before I say that, here's an inverse pyramid. These are all the tests I want to write. These are the tests I write, and these are the tests that are left after I throw away all the tests that make no sense. But most people, when we talk about testing, they separate tests into unit, integration, and end-to-end levels. And we write a lot of unit tests. We write a lot of unit tests because the tools that we have make it so easy to write unit tests. If anyone has used Jest, it's ridiculously easy to write unit tests. Same with Ava and Mocha and all the other testing frameworks for JavaScript. Once you start, before I do integration, here's my opinion of unit tests that test the smallest pieces. Everything can work fine, right, by itself, and yet it makes no sense. But we do write a lot of unit tests, just because of the tools we have. And when you start putting things together, now you're trying to say, okay, my component that I initialized using, HiGen or whatever, how does it work if I, mock the database calls, right? Like mock the REST API. So you start getting into integration tests, where you're trying to put several components together, maybe see the website, how it looks, maybe part of a website or the server. And it's a lot more useful. Now you can figure out when everything was passing by itself in unit tests, the thing doesn't actually make much sense, right? So integration tests are a lot more useful, and you'll see that other people agree with that. But I think the most important tests are end-to-end tests. And with a test where you test the completely deployed system. The system could be running locally, but it still is a complete system. You can stop part of the system, but still you're testing the whole Amazon.com, maybe with payment, kind of stopped. But you want to test the complete website. You want to test the complete API. So these are end-to-end tests. And they're on the tip of a pyramid because we get to them last, and it's so hard to reach there. And we write so few of them that compared to a large number of unit tests, it's really like a tip of an iceberg. But yet, I think, personally, that end-to-end testing is the most important one. And who has a car? Okay? Who has went to a dealership to test drive a car? You just did, when you went there, you did end-to-end test. You did not go there to like, kind of measure the parts and make sure the voltage of a battery is that, right? You actually want to enjoy the whole experience. Now, if car manufacturers or part manufacturers actually skimmed on unit tests, the whole experience would suck, right? Because the car would not start, for example. But the end user doesn't care about unit tests. Anyone who's paying for your contract or your salary doesn't care about unit tests. In fact, the unit tests, or any kind of testing, slows you down. Right? You only get paid to deliver a feature, and how does customer evaluate a feature? Well, they look at a website, is a feature there or not? Can I do that? They don't care how many unit tests you had to write. They don't care like if you use Redux or not. They care about end-to-end. So end-to-end testing is important. A typical kind of development timeline, you start with planning, you start coding, you deploy something, when you deploy to staging environment, you do QA, and then you push into production. Well, typically you do end-to-end testing at staging where you have a complete system, or in production when by definition you have the final thing. You know who else is helping you to do end-to-end testing in production?
Customers.
Exactly. And I highlighted customers in red because when they find bugs they get angry and they stop going to your website and stop using it, so it's not a good thing. So don't let your users test your apps. So if a bug is discovered in planning stages, it costs you nothing to fix it. Maybe in meeting time, maybe it costs you in paper or like whatever. It's really easy. Oh, we shouldn't do it. Okay. Oh, the field should be named this, not that. Easy. So roughly 0. When you discover a bug, when you're coding, well, that's your normal process, right? You working day to day, you code, you discover bugs, you fix them. So it costs some money, but not a lot of money. Once you deployed, right? You deploy the bug, other people could discover it. It goes back to you. You go back and forth. There's a GitHub issue. So it costs a little bit more, right? To triage and fix the bug, but not terribly so. If you discover a bug in staging, it costs you more money because going back and finding the developer who's responsible, or the developer who knows what a bug is, or the developer who can fix it, takes more time. That means more money. Finally, once the bug's in production, it costs a lot. And it's not just direct costs. Also, it's a cost in time because this process could be far removed from the coding stage, right? So you have to switch and what did I do? Where's the code that runs it? Do I have to go off a master branch and do a cherry pick and fix that? And then it costs a lot to figure out what's going on, right? It costs a lot in user, opinion of your brand and things like that. So, what's the solution to this thing? Well, my personal solution is, why don't we do the things that we do here, which is discover actual things that users will experience right here as we code? Like, what's stopping us? What's stopping us from, if I'm working on a web application, running the whole web application locally and running end-to-end tests? Not just unit testing my sorting algorithm, right? But testing the whole thing. So I hope I convinced you, and now you're like, okay, let's test. I'm going to open and control the real browser, right? Just like a real user would do. So what do? You install, you have your test, you have a real browser. How do you control them? Well, the technology that's really popular and has been around for a while is Selenium. Selenium doesn't actually control your browser directly. It goes through a specific driver for that particular browser. Now, the thing about this is this technology is a little bit older than you would expect, right? This thing is always behind the real browser, right? It's not like opening a DevTools and entering a couple JavaScript commands, looking at the dump tree, looking at the event listeners. It's kind of black box that you kind of send messages to, and then somehow they get to your browser. So this leads to kind of indirect control and slow, flaky, unreliable tests. So after a while, if your test is flaky, sometimes it passes, sometimes it doesn't pass, and you know why. Well, something was there in this chain of commands, right, where you kind of send a command or an assertion, and then after a while, it got to the browser, but something was incorrect, so the test failed, you don't know why. This kills it, right? It's worse than having no test. Because after a while, you learn to ignore it and think, the test failed, it's not my logical error or deployment configuration, it's just the nature of the test. So people start ignoring the test, and they start ignoring the failing test because they're not useful. So I don't hate on Selenium, but the whole thing about sending messages to a black box that sends it to another black box that sends it to the browser kind of feels like transporting goods over this excellent chain link bridge, which is so reliable and so enjoyable. Okay, well, now you can have a choice of a headless browser, right? Has been around for a while, Phantom.js. I use it personally. People build like Casper and things on top of that, which is fine. It's more modern, it's more direct than Selenium and WebDriver, but yet, you're like, I'm working in the dark, I have no idea what's happening, right? Yes, I'm controlling a browser, but I get, at best, a stack trace if there's an error, but usually I get nothing, as just element could not be found. Why? So the only way to avoid that hunting in the dark is not to write the test, because the whole experience sucks. Okay, so now that we kind of put down everything else, here's Cypress. And I could go for slides, but why don't I just show you? Okay, so let me make a folder. I'm gonna initialize a repository. Can everyone see it, or should I erase it? Okay, can everyone see the bottom? I'm gonna initialize npm package, and I'm gonna install a development tool, Cypress. Let's see how the network behaves. You install it as a dev dependencies, just like you could install Jest or anything else. It's not too bad, right? So it's downloading not just npm package, but platform-specific binary. So we built a binary for Darwin, Linux, and for Windows. And Cypress is an Electron app, so what we are doing is possible only because thanks to Electron. And as always, 1 second remaining for last minute. Okay, I have a solution for this. Because I already have it on my disk somewhere. So I have a tool called Have It. Okay, it just got installed. Have it. Okay, so if I do Cypress open, there are only 2 commands. Cypress open, that's what you use to open graphical user interface. Cypress run, you don't open the graphical interface, you just run it Electron headlessly or Chrome headlessly. That's what you will do on CI. So Cypress open, and it shows the UI, right? And I kind of apologize if it's too small. I don't think I can zoom in, but it actually scaffolds a project. And is my network down? Let's see. Oh, I guess my network is down. That's why. 1 second. Let me just restart it. And wait. Okay. So now. So it gives me a message that it could not find things. But this is what you would see. So what you see right now is built-in Electron browser. Cypress can control any Chrome-based browser or Chromium-based browser. Firefox support is coming soon. But your website is actually iframed right here. So you see how it looks, you can interact with it. On the left, you see the tests, right? The test command log. And some people get hypnotized by just the tests running, and you lose them forever. But majority of people actually escape this siren's call of seeing what's happening, right? Like that's a big thing compared to headless browsers, right? You just see it typing, right? And I'll show you some cool things. You don't have to record it. No, you don't have to record it. You can just do it yourself. And just like, I know it seems, anyway. So it finished bunch of tests. This is like a kitchen sink project that we call. When you just start Cypress first time in a project, it scaffolds this file so you can see it for yourself the first time, and kind of goes through. There are a lot of comments in the spec file, but I just want to show you this, right? So it follows Mocha, BDD syntax. So you have like describe, and inside you have another describe, and then individual test. So the project describes kitchen sink. It should have a sort of the title is correct. When you click on the name of a test, right, you see every command in the test. Okay, so for example, here before each, it visited this URL, right? So Cypress puts a browser or Electron browser in this special proxy mode, so it becomes its own proxy. So it actually knows what your web application is doing. Like it can observe everything, like you loading static resources, you making XHR calls, right? You can spy on those, mark those. So it actually has, it's a pretty special mode how it operates and puts the browser in. But it knows that you want to visit this, and then you got hash query button. So it knows your selector, and then you make an assertion, and then you query it for another button, and then you make an assertion, and so on. Now the cool thing about this, you can see this on the left, but let me run this thing, right? If you actually hover over this, do you see on the right, it actually highlights the element. So it takes a dump snapshot for every step of a test, and it shows you usually before and after snapshot. So for example, here it queried for this element, and it made an assertion, and then it's the same button really, so it made an assertion. Let me find another one. So for example, here it queried for a list, so it shows the list that it found. Then it made an assertion from that list, but it contains bananas, and this is the element that it found, and then it asserted that it has a class third, right? So not only you see the test runner and all the commands, you see how your web app looked at that particular moment in time when it actually did that. Excellent. So, that's the whole Cypress test runner, right? Compared to Selenium, anything else, the UI is very developer focused. Let me switch to my presentation and see if I want to say anything else. All right. Best thing, MIT license. 100% open source, not limited in any feature-wise or time-wise. You can grab it, run it, install it. If you're paranoid, fork it, save a copy. That's it. The only prevention against people like ripping us shamelessly is because we wrote majority of it in CoffeeScript, so that's a natural thing. With introduction, so you can do that. So typical test loads the app. So you have Sci, which is the only global object that we add. Everything is in Sci API. Sci visit, and then you give it the domain. You can put the domain in a config file, so you don't have to hard code it. And then, for example, Sci get, and then any selector, and then that should be visible. So it's kind of like jQuery, kind of chain syntax, because usually you want to do something, assert something, continue working with element or sub-element, and so on. So you can chain it as long as you want. The assertions are chai assertions plus chai jQuery, Sinon chai. So you can just write it as you would do normally. Here's more typical test. So if I want to, it's just JavaScript, and it comes with Browserify or Webpack, plugin by default. So you can just load other files, put all your comments, testing utils into separate modules, do whatever you want. So for example, I define a function that will visit a slash, so it will use a base URL. So before each test, I want to reset database, which is some function. Before each, I want to visit slash, and then I want to get to-do list, find li element, and should have length 0. So it should be empty list. This is how it looks. Now, let me actually show you this, because this is kind of cool. So I have to-do MVC example, and to-do MVC examples are the coolest examples that one can ask for. So I'm going to start with server, and I want to actually show the code. No, that's too large. Okay, so one thing, so Cypress comes with TypeScript definitions, but you don't have to use TypeScript to actually take advantage of that. In any JavaScript spec file, you can just do this reference types, and then as you hover over anything here, like say site-visit, VS Code will show our documentation right away, so you have like examples and the definition for that particular command. And the same is good for any site API command. Even better, so for example, here's this command, right? Site focused, right? It gets the currently focused element, or at least that's what documentation says, right? And then we want to make assertion that when you load to do MVC list here, that this focused current element should have a class. So let me actually show how cool this is. So I start typing should, right? You have IntelliSense for all the assertions, right, that you can use, right? And there are a lot of assertions that could be there, right? So if I do should have class, right, you see how it actually shows you intelligently the IntelliSense for that particular assertion. So if you're not comfortable with assertions, no big deal, right? You can just follow IntelliSense and everything should be fine. Okay, so let's look at this one, right? Because this is actually a React app, and npm run. So do I have npm run Cypress open? So this is testing the same way as Selenium does, but to do MVC implementation. And it's kind of cool, right? Like you can see it's flying, right? It's doing all these permutations of features, kind of user stories. Hey, I want to select this, I want to mark item as resolved, right? And all sorts of permutations, and then it will go into routing as well. But there's nothing React specific here, right? We only went through DOM, we went through local storage. Cypress can have access to your cookies through HTTP requests. So you might think like, why should I care, right? But if you make an argument at a company, hey, we want to switch to this framework or use this library, it's so easy for you to write a couple of end-to-end tests and let's start switching frameworks, because your end-to-end test runner can do anything. So if you want to make an argument that we should switch to something, by writing a couple tests, you make it safe and easy for anyone in management to say, yeah, let's try it. We're not going to break it. Okay, so all the little things, but I want to show something that's I want to say unique, right? So I have this test. It should allow me to add to-do items. And I'll put only, right? So we're following Mocha, exclusive things. So Cypress is watching my spec, so it's rerunning my test as a type, right? So this is test-driven end-to-end test development. Have Cypress on one screen, code another, work as long as your end-to-end test pass, right? So this one, and you can see how, again, first command was get new to-do. Right? So I cannot actually show it, because what happens when I do that, it actually switches the dump snapshot and shows me the current element. So it destroys my view and zooms in here. But you can see that it got element .new to do. It typed buy some cheese, and it's kind of light. But if I click on this, and I get these buttons before and after. So before, this input box was empty, and after, it has buy some cheese. So it's smart enough to figure out that the dump has changed after this command, so it knows to show you both. and then I type enter, and it shows again before and after. So after, this app added this, and then just to confirm that this actually worked, I got to-do list class, which is highlighted. I got the first element. I found the label highlighted, and I expected label to contain buy some cheese, and this passed. But that's not. So I was happy user of Cypress for a year before I joined the company. That's not why I got excited. I got excited because of this. So should contain. So instead of, this, I was like, buy me a car, right? Because we are on a car theme. Okay, so you see that this is actually running, right, and kind of pending, and then it becomes red. So Cypress intelligently retries your assertion for, by default, 4 seconds, but you can change it. And if it doesn't pass, then it throws an error. Because we all know that the web is dynamic. You cannot put an exact, timeout on any command. And if you put exact timeout like the Selenium does, where you say wait for 30 seconds, it's going to wait for 30 seconds, and your test will become very, very slow. So Cypress will wait for 4 seconds, but if assertion passes, it will continue, immediately. So in this case, it actually waited for a couple of seconds, and so it expected label to contain buy me a car, and it timed out. And you're like, let me see why. So who loves DevTools? Okay, so I'm gonna clear. No, just clear. Right? If you click on an error, right, or any command really, it actually prints the element at that at that particular time you're working with in your DevTools. So you actually have the actual thing that you can inspect. And when you click on an assertion that failed, or any assertion, you get precise element, and you get like the label, right? And you can actually inspect and find the value and so on. So as soon as I saw it, I was like, wow, like these are the best error messages one could find, right? And they're so useful to me. A test, and by the way, because Cypress can see peer in your DOM, it knows exactly what's going on. There'll be no flake, or at least if there is flake, that means you don't understand something in your application. Like that's the only reason, really. Now there could be bug in Cypress, and there are lots of bugs, but majority of times where the test is flake is really you have a race condition that you didn't account for, because Cypress is so fast and moves so fast that it probably is doing something weird that you should express better through testing. Okay, so this is nice. I love the error messages. They're so useful. Great. What happens on CI, right? Because that's what you guys are wondering right now. Like I can do this locally, and let's say npm run. Do I have, so yes, I do have npm run. So I'm gonna do npm Cypress run, and this should run only a single test, right? Notice that it said started video recording. This is Electron app. By default, you get screen recording for free. It's built in, you don't have to install anything. And so the test failed. And for example, it actually took a screenshot. So yeah, I mean, first of all, you get a helpful error message, right? The same as we saw before, but even better, it actually took a screenshot at the moment of failure automatically, right? So you can judge, what happened. Even better, it said I took a video, and the video in this case will look a little bit weird because we only ran one test, so it's like majority of time it's just this thing starting. So that's the whole video, right? So imagine debugging this, right? And I love debugging, don't get me wrong. I just love when I have all the information, right? And this gives me all the information enough, so every time I debug with Cypress, usually it's like looking at CI screenshots and videos like, oh yeah, well, I guess, this is wrong, or this is old version, right? Or like the data is not there. So it was really simple to debug. Okay, so now that I convinced you, Oh yeah, we have a lot of examples. This was example to do MVC. We have a whole video course on writing a React app and testing it in parallel by a guy who's really good at React and I had the instructor in React. So I showed this. Oh, API and documentation. Okay, how can I forget? Usually open source projects are bad in documentation. We have, well, not only the guides, but every command that you've seen, let's say, like click, right, this is the API, kind of page for site.click with all the arguments, patterns, examples, and this is like that for every command. We made the decision that 25% of our effort when we open source this went to just updating documentation because we wanted to have good documentation, kind of like Vue.js has and like some other frameworks don't have. Okay, so I just want to finish this by saying something for React folks here. What you've seen doesn't depend on any framework, right? It just works through normal DOM and normal events, okay? But you probably want to do something for integration, for individual components, right? And if you want to test a single component, you still need like real browser, right? You need DOM, you need local storage, all the things. You want to clean up between each test like Cypress does, because it like blows away the frame, starts a fresh one, so the tests don't affect each other. And you want to be able to stop the server because you're testing just a component, so it's nice. So what you really need is the same thing as your end-to-end test. Like that's the whole, environment. You really want all of that so you can work with individual component. So you want to be able to interact with your component, right, through normal means. And so what we've done, we wrote these little adapters, including Cypress React unit test, that allow you to do that. So you install it in addition to Cypress for your React project. You can import your component from your project, and then you import just a single function called mount from this React unit test. And now, instead of like doing site visit, you can just mount that component, and instead of the whole page, you'll just have this little mini web React application running. And that's it. So go to Cypress React unit test and you will see how it looks, but it's really cool, right? Like you just have your little thing and it works by itself. So if anyone has tried Storybook.js, this is exactly the same kind of thing, but it's not just a demo, it's a test, right, for each situation. And the thing is, we personally actually don't like integration as a name, right? So people say, right, mostly integration test. We don't agree because we think there are no integration tests. And I'm just going to zoom through the slides for a minute just so I can prove that there are no integration tests, really. In our world, that as a word should not be used. So imagine a single function, right? Add two numbers. So what are the inputs? Well, A and B. And what is the output? Return value from a function, right? This return value is returned through JavaScript language mechanism. The test is really easy. You call the function, you get the back value, and you compare it to what's expected, right? And we call this unit test. Well, what if we actually, instead of returning the value, grab the document and put the return value into a specific element? Right? We're just not returning it, but putting it somewhere. Well, the inputs are still the same arguments. The output is DOM, and we can still test it, right? We just have to get result from this same DOM element. Now, we should call this integration test, right? Because now we're using the DOM. We're not just doing unit tests. What if instead of grabbing arguments from functions arguments, we grab them from local storage? And we put result back into the DOM. So from local storage, we did something, put result into the DOM. Well, we can still set it up, call the function, look at the document, get result. Again, we call this integration test, but in reality, it's not. We grabbing this component, we have to give an input somehow, could be HTTP request, anything really. And we also get all the side effects, right? Your component could write things to the DOM, could write things to the server, local storage, anything, cookies. These are all our outputs. So you have to set up these things, you have to mount your component, and you have to make assertions after you interact with components. It still is unit test, really. Your unit is component, these are your inputs, these are your outputs. So in reality, your end-to-end tests, they visit the deployed system. Your unit tests, just mounting your unit of code, and they again interact with that component as you interact with the normal page. And you still can use the same API, everything included, local storage, server stubbing, anything. Finally, I want to finish with, who cares, right? So people, once they discovered Cypress, we went open source, people went crazy. So now we have a lot of publicity where people just rave and like mind-blown emoji and all that thing. But thank you so much, and you can find the slides online and check out cypress.io because that's where all the docs and things live. Thank you.